Hi, my name's Kieran Hosty and I'm a maritime archaeologist at the Australian National Maritime Museum in Sydney, Australia. Maritime archaeology is the study of the past by looking at what's called material culture. It's just a fancy name for the stuff that people left behind. The clothes that they wear, their tools of trade, the methods of employment, the buildings they lived in. As a maritime archaeologist, I'm specifically interested in shipwrecks, those vessels that sank on a voyage to and from Australia. I examine their cargo, I examine the personal effects of the crew and the passengers on board that ship, and I also look at how the ship was constructed. I do that through a variety of means. I do that through excavation, I do that through survey, and I do it through examination of the bits and pieces left on the sea floor. Maritime archaeology is quite a new discipline in terms of archaeology. Maritime archaeologists have been around for about 50 years, and the Maritime Archaeology program at the Australian National Maritime Museum has been here for about 25 years. There's actually 3 of us on staff. The Australian National Maritime Museum have been running a series of maritime archaeological expeditions into the Coral Sea and into the Great Barrier Reef, or on the Great Barrier Reef, for the last 5 years. Those expeditions concentrated on Indian-built ships or ships going to India in the 19th century. So we examined a group of ships out here on wreck reefs, in particular HMS Porpoise and the Cato, a vessel on Frederick Reef called the Royal Charlotte, 400 kilometres off the coast of Queensland, and another vessel up here called the Mermaid, which is actually a colonial naval ship, which was also wrecked on a place called Flora Reef. This expedition, the Ferguson project, is to look at a shipwreck called the Ferguson, which is an Indian-built troop ship. And the Ferguson was on a voyage all the way from Sydney up to India, going through the Great Barrier Reef, up past present-day Cairns, and it was wrecked on an isolated reef way up here, 800 kilometres north of Cairns in Queensland. When the Ferguson left Sydney for Calcutta in 1841, it was carrying troops to resupply the garrison in Calcutta in India. Now, there was 2 ways of getting to India in the 1840s. They were sailing up what's called the inner route between the Queensland coast and the Great Barrier Reef, and sailing on the outer route, which is the area outside the Great Barrier Reef. Now, because the inner route was supposedly safer and a better option in poor weather, the Ferguson decided to sail up the inner route between the Queensland coast and the Great Barrier Reef. And it was sailing along quite happily when it struck an uncharted reef, subsequently called Ferguson Reef. Luckily for everyone on board the Ferguson, the passengers and the crew, everyone got off safely and there was no loss of life. The National Maritime Museum and the Silent World Foundation, our partners in this project, will be going up to visit Ferguson Reef in 2013 to actually try and locate and also archaeologically survey the remains of the Ferguson. We will be keeping a weather eye out for any sort of cyclonic activities, any sort of monsoonal activity happening in that area. We'll certainly get rain and we may get large seas driven up by the wind, but hopefully we'll find the site, survey the site and move on to other targets. Hi. People think maritime archaeology is quite an exciting thing, that we go off into the wilderness doing all sorts of wonderful things. And that is true, it's a fantastic job. However, there's a lot of mundane stuff, a lot of stuff which traps me in the office for days, if not hours at a time. This stuff involves getting permission to do the work I do. Now in Australia we have a thing called the Historic Shipwrecks Act. Now that means that all vessels older than 75 years of age are protected by law. Now as an archaeologist, I've got to get a permit to do any sort of work on a shipwreck. If I want to survey it, research it, recover any material, I need a permit to do so. I also have to negotiate with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. Now they're the management agency which manages the Great Barrier Reef. Now they're very, very particular about what the sort of things I can and cannot do in a marine park. I can't capture any wildlife, I can't collect any shells, I can't do anything like that. In fact, they're so particular that what I have to do is actually label all the equipment I take into the marine park to make sure that if it turns up later, they know who to contact so they can return it back to me. There's also all the mundane stuff as well. I've got to assemble a crew of people. There's about 33 divers and crew coming out with us on the Great Barrier Reef. I've got to make sure we have the right skippers, make sure I have a diving doctor to take care of us in case something goes wrong, make sure I have people to look after any artefacts I may recover. I need dive supervisors to manage the divers in the water. I need boat operators. I even need the fuel for the boats and the outboard motors. All that sort of stuff I have to organise leading up to an expedition. There's also a huge amount of equipment. There's about 4.5 tonnes of equipment coming up with us onto the Great Barrier Reef. We have a remote operated vehicle, we have magnetometers, metal detectors, diving equipment, diving compressors, tonnes and tonnes of stuff coming up with us, including food, water and fuel for all the vessels.